Good afternoon. Hi, I'm Lauren Gustus, and I'm the West Region Editor for McClatchy. I'm also the editor of the Sacramento Bee. Thanks for joining us this afternoon. We're here today to talk about how we can get California workers back on the job. And we're thrilled that you can join us. A couple of programming notes. First, if you've got questions, please put them in the comment section. We're taking questions throughout the course of the time that we spend here together this afternoon. We really want to hear from you. That's what makes this thing work and work well. Second, we've got a hashtag to share with you today. It's AskOnwardCA. So if you've got questions and you'd like to ask them via social, go ahead and pop the hashtag AskOnwardCA onto any questions that you might have. So we're here today to talk with experts in tech and philanthropy about what is being done and what should be done for California workers. The coronavirus epidemic has prompted Governor Gavin Newsom and California counties to issue stay-at-home orders that have kept many of our businesses closed for weeks. More than 2 million California residents have recently filed for unemployment. And while we are both flattening and stretching the curve, critical health measures have dealt a devastating financial blow to the families of affected workers and the businesses that have employed them. Before COVID-19, 40% of Americans said they could not afford a $400 expense. We do not know what the response to that question would bring to bear in California today. We are, however, resilient. And so this afternoon, I'm eager to dig in on how business, government, and philanthropy are facilitating an economic stimulus and recovery for all workers and as soon as possible. So again, I'm Lauren Gustus, editor of the Sacramento Bee and West Region editor for McClatchy. We're thrilled you're here today with us for this conversation. If you have questions, please put them in the comments section or use the hashtag AskOnwardCA, and we'll get those questions to our colleagues who have joined us here today. Speaking of our colleagues, I'd love to introduce them today and then we'll get right going. First is Jake Soberal. Jake is the co-founder and co-CEO of Bitwise Industries. Bitwise is a Fresno-based company, and its software development arm, Shift3 Technologies, is a founding partner in onwardca.org. And I want to spend just a minute on onwardca.org because it's critical to the conversation that we'll have today. If you're looking for work or support in small business loans, unemployment assistance, emergency non-monetary assistance, that would be food, healthcare, childcare, visit onwardca.org. The site, which was built and launched in partnership with Oakland-based technology nonprofit, the Kapor Center, and Cedric is joining us today from the Kapor Center, as well as LinkedIn, Salesforce, and Governor Gavin Newsom's office, is live and available to all California residents. It offers a database of companies and industries that are hiring workers across the state as we ramp up our own response to the pandemic, from healthcare and logistics to call center and delivery services. When the site launched last week, it had an inventory of more than 70,000 jobs. Those positions that are open and available today, and they expect to add thousands more. That's onwardca.org. Please take a look. We're also joined, as I mentioned, by Cedric Brown. Cedric is the Chief Foundation Officer at the Kapor Center. Cedric has worked on a number of initiatives that have built pathways to opportunities for people of color, including the Obama Foundation. He co-created Brothers Code and the Oakland Startup Network. We're eager to talk with him about philanthropy's role in the recovery. So with that, let's dive right in. I've got a question of my own to get us started, and then we'll take it from there. So let's talk a little bit about how California can rebuild its economy, both thoughtfully and inclusively, after so many have lost their income due to the pandemic. I'm interested in what government can do, what the private sector can do, and what philanthropy can do. And my guess is there's an intersection, right, with respect to those responses. But Cedric, I'd love to start with you. Can you dive in on that one?
Sure, and thank you, Lauren, for having us here today. Jake and I are here today. So if I can just start with pointing to the partnership that Onward California represents between philanthropic organization, the Kapor Center, which actually houses a range of different issues and initiatives that are all trying to ensure that there's robust representation from communities of color in the tech sector, because we believe at our core, that if the tech sector has this kind of representation, that problems will be solved in a different manner, that we're going to have better products. And this Onward California platform provides an example of that kind of thinking, coming out of a community, understanding that we need to provide immediate responses to people who are going to be displaced because of this pandemic, and built on a tech platform that goes immediately to scale. My compatriot, companion, Jake will talk more, I'm sure, about the technologies behind it. But it's this kind of partnership between a philanthropic institution and a private sector business that can really allow us to grow, really allow us to get information and resources to people who really need it. Let me also just say that I see two plays here. One is practice and one is policy. With practice, again, we have to get resources to people who need them immediately. How am I going to survive? What is the money going to come from for me to be able to pay rent, for me to buy food for my family, for me to be able to make it through these furloughs and layoffs? And then there's a longer term play, which I call policy, right? Looking at the systems in which all of this resides, and being able to do things in the system using policies that are going to enable people to live and thrive, enable workers to live and thrive. Philanthropy has a role to play in advocating for, in dreaming up, in testing out some of these potential policy plays in order for the public sector to take them over, to replicate them, and to move them into scale. So we see that there is an intersection, there is an interplay between the three sectors that you named, public, private, and philanthropy or independent sector, that can actually help to lift up and answer questions about our economy and how to recover from it.
That's great. Thanks, Cedric. And Jake, I'd love your perspective. Same question.
Yeah, I think that there is a role for all of us in this. And I think from the standpoint of policy, to pick up on Cedric's thread, Bitwise is really excited to follow the leadership of Cedric, of Mitch and Frida Kapor, of the Kapor Center, and of Governor Gavin Newsom in acknowledging at the outset of this that our organizations all exist to serve folks who are historically left out, people of color, people coming from low-income communities, people coming from immigrant communities, whatever that may be. And in this moment, I think one of the things that motivated us to action, and where we felt like we had a primary responsibility, specific to Bitwise as a private sector business, to respond, is that we know those communities are going to be disproportionately impacted by the effect of job loss amidst COVID-19. And so our heart was, how can we deploy a tool on the practical side that allows the folks that we exist to serve to get back to work more quickly, to get the resources they need to survive until they get back to work more quickly, with the hope is that we don't take an entire band of underserved communities and have this be a long-term setback for them, but instead that it be a short-term blip. And I think that we've got a lot of work to do if we want to accomplish anything near that. But one of the things from a policy standpoint that I know Bitwise, I know the Kapor Center wants to see surfaced in all of this is that we cannot forget these communities and how deep the impact might be on them.
Great, thanks. And again, I'm Lauren Gustis. I'm the editor at the Sacramento Bee and West Region editor for McClatchy. We're thrilled that you're here with us this afternoon, and I'm joined by Cedric Brown from the Kapor Center and Jake Soberal from Bitwise Industries. And I'd like to ask a follow-up of you both with respect to what the interplay looks like as we move forward. I would love to get your perspective on what specifically we're doing to reach underserved or impacted communities, and then what should we be doing? So two-part question. What are we doing right now? How is Onward CA made available to impacted communities? And then how do we further extend those efforts as the economic impacts of coronavirus continue to present?
Yeah, if it makes sense, Cedric, I'm happy to take the near term, and I think the long term maybe is more your court. The near term is that, look, job loss is traumatic for everybody. Even if you're making six figures and you have been completely sort of upended by the effects on the commercial side of COVID. But one thing that is uniquely a part of the story of job loss for someone living in poverty is that it isn't just about finding the next job. It's about finding the next set of groceries in between here and getting the next job. It's about, what does childcare look like while I am trying to get a job during shelter in place? It's about, how do I get access to a workers fund in my community that is distributing actual dollars so that I can survive in the, be wonderful if it's 1 week of unemployment, but what if it's a month or 2 months? And so the specific design of onwardca.org is to track along that journey of unemployment and hopefully make order out of a chaotic universe. And what that means is that Onward endeavors to collect just a bit of information about the individual worker who's been displaced amidst COVID or had their hours reduced or pay reduced, whatever that might look like. And with that information, rather than returning the thousands, if not tens of thousands of resources, all good, that are floating around out there, returning those that are most relevant to you based on geography, based on industry, based on desired earnings, and the like. And the platform is constantly working to do more and better of that. The more the platform gets used, the more we can see how different sectors, say retail, track into other sectors, say logistics, right? And provide nearer results. But the idea is to track with you along essential life resources, so money, groceries, shelter, childcare. So first, we're taking care of the immediate. Second, for many, this will be an opportunity to look at retraining and upskilling, refreshing, whatever that may be. And so the second stage of that journey is, what opportunities are available to you in your community, even during shelter in place? And there are many coming out from the California Community College system, from educational startups that are offering online training and the like. And then the last is to connect you to jobs that, whether in your industry or in an industry that your prior experience tracks you into, are well suited for you. And so we don't want families thinking that they've got to move across the state to find employment. We want to connect them to employment in their communities. And maybe a word on how we're doing that. I think that we get a lot of, we give a lot of oxygen to those that are hiring thousands or hundreds of thousands of people. And we're all quite glad that Amazon is creating a lot of opportunities. Those are going to be good jobs for a lot of families. But what thousands of jobs out there by Amazon signal is that the logistics company in Eureka or San Bernardino or Los Angeles may not have thousands of jobs, but has 5 or 10 or 20. And those are 5 or 10 or 20 jobs that will feed 5 or 10 or 20 families. And so we're doing quite a lot in the way of manual data collection in reaching out to those small businesses and local employers, such that their jobs are surfaced on the platform just the same as those of large employers. And we think that that is really, really important to serving workers, keeping them in their community and getting them back to work quickly.
And me. So I want to kind of follow up on what I was setting up earlier around the systems and the need to look at systems. We actually don't know what the breadth and depth of this pandemic is going to do in terms of wreaking havoc to our economy, in our economy and in our communities. And so being able to learn as we go along what we need to focus on, how are we looking at serving the people who are most vulnerable, and what kinds of changes do we need to advocate for, to put in place around systems that are going to protect such workers, such families, such communities, is super important. I'm of the opinion that we can't just go back to what was happening before the pandemic with low-wage jobs and hard-hit industries like hospitality, and we can't go back to just having tech contract jobs with no benefits. That this should be an opportunity for us to critically examine the systems that have enabled families and workers to be stuck economically in positions that have flat wages while the cost of living goes up. So this is where I think philanthropy can play a particular role, because if there's one thing that organized philanthropy is good at, it's analyzing stuff. So we need to be looking at the trends that have emerged out of this battle against the pandemic and leading the conversations about how to think differently about money, about poverty, about income, and about what it means to create a common good. People haven't been able to run from this pandemic, and there are predictions that this isn't the end of coronavirus, nor is it the only pandemic that we might face. And then remember, before COVID, the big talk was about automation displacing workers, especially low-income people and folks in communities of color. So it's super important for us to be assembling the playbook of lessons and moving toward some kinds of strategies that are going to build economically resilient communities and families.
Cedric, that's really interesting. I want to follow up with you because when some people hear that we can't go back to where we were, right? There are reasons that we were where we were. These problems aren't easy to solve, right? We call them wicked problems. They're complicated. And it's not for lack of effort on behalf of some that we have been unable to, say, create more affordable housing solutions in California. So with that, we can also anticipate that we'll see less or fewer resources at the level of the state government with respect to how we might support individuals, given that the state relies on income from residents to fund its budget, and counties do the same, and so on and so forth. So my question is this: how do we, when the budget is so tight, build a playbook that will demand action and the attention of those in leadership who need to be responsive to our challenges? What mechanisms, or even what I would say areas do we need to be studying up on now so that the evidence, or the, as you say, the playbook is irrefutable if and when we get to make those decisions about how we allocate limited resources?
Well, I guess, Lauren, I'm of the opinion that we have had a certain kind of playbook. We've had a certain kind of analysis all along around income inequality. California has the 6th highest income inequality in the nation. And for as large an economy as we have, the 5th largest in the world, we have to look at the impact of that income inequality and the strategies that are going to help start closing those gaps. We have information about how to close such gaps. We have strategies and plans. And I think that this is the opportunity, because we're in kind of a pause around life right now, that enables us to be more reflective about what we can do. This is the opportunity to generate some political will behind moving more, I'm going to have to say it, more tax dollars toward closing the income inequality gaps. This is why I say we can't go back to just kind of life as usual. I bet that parents have an increased appreciation of teachers and schools now because they see the tough work that they do. So is there political will for us to invest more in schools now? I bet that people are thankful for the opportunity to be able to work from home, those who can, because they have access to broadband, but those who can't are stuck. So is this our opportunity to now start looking at closing the gap in the digital divide, so more of our folks will be able to work from home? I bet that people are thankful for preventative health care, which enables them to be okay as they consider the effects of COVID coming into their own homes. But what about the people who are at increased risk of succumbing to the disease because they don't have preventative healthcare or any kind of healthcare at all? So I feel like part of this is just a mind shift that has to happen, and us taking advantage of seeing laid bare these inequalities that exist in California and in our nation, and saying we're going to do something about it. I understand the practicality of a tight budget, but I think budgets can end up being tight because of the political will and context in which they are created. So I wish we did have somebody from the public sector on here who could directly address that, because to me, as an outsider, it looks like there is this moment for us to generate greater political will to push against what has been the status quo, to no longer blame people for being poor, to get rid of that myth that if you're poor, it's your fault, you're in it on your own. We need to go beyond that, because we see how these inequalities end up creating dangerous and deadly situations for people who are now at risk because of this pandemic related to their socioeconomic status.
I would add on to that, Lauren. I think that you're seeing really powerful leadership from philanthropy via the Kapor Center and Schmidt Futures, MasterCard, and others that have just hopped into initiatives like Onward, in that they are taking that first leap in providing an immediate solution, and then we know that they've been in the game of those longer term systemic solutions for a long time. I think we're also seeing really excellent leadership at the state level from Governor Gavin Newsom in just being out front and providing really national level leadership in the way that we're responding in California. I would echo what Cedric's saying in that it's not close to enough. We're not close to being covered to come out of this, even in the best case, without having set back the communities that we're most concerned about. I will use an example from our core work that we are really proud of, and that is Geekwise Academy. And I think it's evidence that Geekwise Academy is a piece of what we do at Bitwise Industries, I think it's evidence that we're not going to get there on accident. And Geekwise Academy exists, yes, to teach people to code, but the entire model is set up around deliberately reaching into communities of poverty and creating pathways for them into the technology industry. Historically, our industry has not been good at that. We've been just flat miserable at it. Meanwhile, it creates the large majority of wealth in our state. And so I think that's evidence of an intentional sort of design around business that needs to be more a part of coming out of this. And Bitwise is not alone in that. There are outstanding companies in venture portfolios that have focused on social impact for decades that are aiming at that. And I think that this moment is a reminder that if we don't change that and make that really a prerequisite of doing business, that you're also leveling up communities that have been left out in whatever sector you're in, we're going to find ourselves at every pandemic, at every recession, at every moment of crisis in exactly this spot.
Jake, how can people learn more about Geekwise? Where do they go?
Geekwiseacademy.com. And really, whether it's the work we're doing with Onward, or the work we're doing with Salesforce, or the work we're doing in any category, including geekwiseacademy.com, they can go to bitwiseindustries.com, which is the parent company.
Great, thanks. And if you're just joining us, I'm Lauren Gussis. I'm the West Region Editor for McClatchy, the editor of the Sacramento Bee, and I'm joined by Cedric Brown of the Kapor Center and Jake Soberal at Bitwise Industries. Bitwise has partnered with Kapor and others, including the state government, the Newsom administration, to build onwardca.org. This is a landing that will enable anyone who's looking for services as they grapple with coronavirus's economic impacts to find them. So we're talking about the basic rights and needs, food, healthcare, shelter assistance, all the way up to how do I get retrained for new employment opportunities. There are jobs available today on onwardca.org. When it launched last week, there were 70,000 jobs on the site. The team is actively working to seed the site with additional opportunities. So if you're looking for help, if you're looking for support, this is the Newsom administration supported one-stop shop for you to find assistance with respect to the spectrum of challenges that we may be facing today. And they are not insignificant. As we talked about at the outset, over 2 million Californians have already applied for unemployment assistance, and that's a staggering number. Jake, I'd like to take a question that Cedric addressed just a minute ago and did so really eloquently, and ask you for your thoughts or your perspective. We talked about how we can't go back to the way that it was, and that we have an opportunity to do better here. And we talked about the newfound appreciation that many of us have for our school teachers. As a parent of a 4 and a 7-year-old, I feel that acutely and every day. We talked about bridging that digital divide, where we may have good connectivity in urban areas. Obviously, that's less so in rurals. And school districts right now are delivering MiFis and computers to families in rural school districts so that we can find equal access to educational opportunities as we navigate through the coronavirus. So there's an intersection, right, of two of the threads that Cedric discussed. We also talked about the stigma that comes with being poor, and how we can work through that and navigate away from what has historically been an individualized response that is person specific, which we know is not the case. I'm interested in your perspective on opportunities as we emerge. You talked very broadly about how we have an opportunity to level set, and how that a prerequisite of doing business should be that we level set as we move forward and emerge from coronavirus. As a business leader who manages a team that's not insignificant, I'm looking for your perspective on what changes you might make, or how you think the future of work may change as we emerge from the shelter in place that we find ourselves in today. You know, if you were to look into you know, the crystal ball, although I think that would be a scary prospect for any of us at this time. I might take that back, because who could have foreseen this? You know, as you look ahead at what we have learned so far about how we are working and what is working and what isn't, you know, what does the future look like for you as an employer in the Central Valley that's working to create jobs and opportunities for local people every day?
Yeah, I think that there's so much of that question where we just don't know. I know that so Bitwise is perhaps something of an outlier in that we have our business is founded on the premise of reaching folks who have been left out of opportunity and bringing them into opportunity. I mean, and the Kapor Center would be exactly the same. And so that we are somewhat unique in that our team is made up of those individuals who have been left out. That is how we built Bitwise. That is the strength of Bitwise. But I think that what we're seeing, and sadly so, is that our 200 plus people are all attached to communities that then surface out to being a group of several thousand people that are not working for employers that have the same lens. And so we're seeing the depth of need that exists in our communities, and that I'll use the specific example. We're headquartered in Fresno, California. Fresno is historically a economically poor city, and we are observing that we do not, as a city, have the infrastructure to rapidly respond and serve those in the most need in our city in a moment of crisis. We just don't. There are, I'd say, a handful of companies and nonprofits and the like that are just sort of breaking their backs to try and keep up with the need, and unable to do so. And what I don't think we realize is that coming out of this, the risk of that is not, I mean, if you want to be really, really callous and cold. The risk of that is not some remote family that has a harder couple of months. The risk of that is that the nonprofits that we've spent decades trying to create in our community aren't going to exist when we get back. The restaurants that we liked eating at are just not going to be there. And that's going to get very, very close to home. And so I think that for us, at least our mind in when we think about what the world looks like when we come back is how can we change the system such that there aren't a few of us that are super well-funded venture-backed companies that survive, and then a minority, the majority of us that are small businesses that are left to either completely sort of fall into abject poverty or start from scratch, because it's not the world that we want. And so I think that we really, as a city and as a business community, speaking locally to Fresno, need to think deeply around what we each view as our responsibility in a steady state. And that is sadly not the reaction that I'm hearing from other business owners, that we need to lay off 100 people because we're going to miss our year. I have a really, really hard time with that argument while you're keeping your beach house. And so those are the things that we are focused on, and where our voices, I think, to the greatest degree possible, are going to be used coming out of this.
Lauren, if I may, maybe I'm unduly hopeful that people are being reflective in this moment, where you don't have a commute and you can think about how this pandemic, one can think about how this pandemic is changing, how you want to move through life and what you're committed to and what your values are and what time with your family is like and time spent at work is like. Jake referred earlier to social impact, businesses that have a social impact orientation. And Bitwise is certainly a prime example of that. There are other businesses, Kapor Capital, which is our investment arm, invests in seed stage startups that are closing gaps, that have an impact orientation. We want to do positive things in our community, and we're a business, so we're still going to be providing a product or service, and we're still going to be trying to make a profit as we go through our business workings. And my hope is that as folks see, as business owners perhaps see the ways that their business benefits from being of service in a community and can align that with their business practices, that we'll see more social impact oriented businesses that are gap closing and that are having positive effects in their communities. It's a this is a sector that has existed for a long time. This is work that has existed, but my hope is that we're going to see more of this kind of Bitwise type work as we move forward.
I've got a question from a viewer, and it follows nicely on the discussion that we're having here. And it is this from MMW Pro 63. How should prerequisites for a business to contribute to the community be determined? Should it be done through regulation at the state level, or should it be mutually determined amongst, say, the business, the community, and local government, philanthropy? What is the best? You've got direct experience, Jake. Cedric, you have direct experience through the business arm of the Kapor Center. Talk a little bit about, in a perfect world, this would seem to be an opportunity that doesn't require a lot of resource from government in the term with respect to financial or fiscal support, but from a policy standpoint, how do we come together to make that happen? That's the question that we've gotten.
I'm happy to begin. Yeah, I think that if you're in a business that requires somebody else to lose for you to win, you need to think deeply about how you reorient your business so that is not the case. And what I mean by that is it would be very easy, let's be very specific in the context of Bitwise, for us to enter into the very same game that the balance of the technology industry has played for really most of its existence. And that's that we hire really one type of human from a handful of universities it meets all of our objective and preferred criteria, and we pay them lots of money, and we make lots of money. And what that does is it opens up a gap of income inequality caused by a very, very wealthy industry that is not inviting people from different contexts into it. Now, the assumption there is that what I'm actually saying is that people of color, people of poverty are concessionary talent in the technology industry. I'm saying just the opposite. I am saying that there is, because we built the industry around one group of people, we've assumed that's the only group of people that have a place in it. What Bitwise is evidence of, what hundreds of other companies that are in this social impact space are evidence of, is that there is talent in communities of poverty, communities of color, that is full of like a deep richness that is different and in many cases better than the talent coming out of majority people groups. Use a specific example that is stark and perhaps overused is we have too few women engineers in technology, period. Meanwhile, the dramatic majority of users of technology are female. We're not going to be very good at serving an audience that we can't empathize with. And the same is true of new majority people groups, of communities of poverty. We're not going to be able to serve and reach them with B2C technology unless we understand the actual consumer. So I think thinking differently about how we source our teams, thinking differently about what are the unintended consequences of always buying from the cheapest supplier. What are the unintended consequences of choosing to buy from the national vendor instead of the local vendor? The truth of the matter is that I'll localize it again to Fresno. The Fresno business community has enough dollars in it to sustain itself. If it was committed to buying from local vendors, supporting local businesses, paying fair wages to both vendors and employees, and reaching into really the fabric of our community is one of a community of color, an immigrant community. If we were committed to leveraging the power of those people and bringing them into the economic prosperity that too few of us enjoy, we would be ready to weather moments like this in a very, very different way than we actually are.
So Jake said the words community a number of times. I said earlier that this is an opportunity for us to really think and rethink about what it means to be part of a community and a greater good. And while I don't believe that this needs to come about through state regulation per se, I mean, there might be something that the state could do, that the public sector could do to ensure that this work was happening. But my hope, again, is that there is going to be an understanding about what community is. And as Jake said, business owners will understand how they are contributing to community, but also benefiting from. When I speak about a greater good, and I think about the investments that go into our public sector infrastructure, I also think about the ways that the private sector benefits from those public sector investments. So if the private sector is benefiting, then what's your payback to the public greater good? If you're using the roads, if you're using, what do we want to say, protection and police services, if you're using airports, if you're using people who are educated in public school systems, if you're using all of these things, then what is the accountability around your helping to support those things that eventually support you? So I want this to be part of the discourse around how businesses recover and the responsibility that businesses then have back to the communities in which they exist. Now, I also don't want to make it seem like businesses don't do that. chambers of commerce that come together and really try to figure out the best ways for businesses to have a positive impact is an example. Social impact companies, again, like Bitwise is an example. I think that there are some nonprofits in the independent sector that are trying to work in public-private partnerships with businesses, or in independent sector and in private partnerships with businesses, in order to prompt this kind of dialogue and phenomenon. But businesses have to take a look at how they benefit from the work that happens outside of their own sector as well.
Great, thanks. I'd like to transition to the federal stimulus, but we'll take a programming break and remind folks who might have, or let folks know who might have just joined, who we are and what the topic of conversation is today. My name is Lauren Gustis. I'm the editor of the Sacramento Bee and West Region editor for McClatchy. I'm joined by Cedric Brown from the Kapor Center in Oakland, and Jake Soberal from Bitwise, which is based in Fresno. We're talking about the response, California's response, and our responsibility to get workers back to work and to ensure financial stability for those who are at risk of being left behind as coronavirus continues to have an impact on our local economies, our statewide economy, and of course, more broadly. So this question comes from the audience. We're wondering, with the federal stimulus package that has just the most recent one, right? So the one that was just passed, which is the stimulus 3, essentially is what we're calling it. Do you think that enough has been done to ensure that working families are the focus of our efforts? And if not, would love to hear more about what we might do as we move forward.
I couldn't delineate between federal stimulus 1, 2, and 3. I'm just not that familiar, but I can, without being familiar, I can say unequivocally no. I don't know which one was PPP in. That gets a lot of conversation in ours. Is that in 3?
The CARES Act.
Yeah. So I think that as employers, right, if we're going to be out there applying for that, right, it's incumbent upon us to be passing those workers on to those wages on to workers. And I think that's just a beginning of what it looks like to support families. But I say, sort of so abruptly that the answer is no, because I don't think we're to the depth of the impact that this is going to have on working families, particularly those at the lowest levels of earning.
So of course, I'm sitting here with my laptop and I looked up the stimulus 3 while Jake was giving his answer, because similarly, I could not make a distinction between the 3 that have passed and even the conversation about this 4th one that is being discussed now. So I agree with Jake. I feel like not enough is being done to really talk about poverty alleviation in the long term. So I'm not going to frame it as enough to address working families, as much as I am going to say, what are we doing to ensure, as I said at the top of this call, what are we going to do to ensure that we are getting rid of poverty and we're making families and communities as economically resilient as possible? Are we doing all we can? There are great people who were working on those bills and have helped to usher the bills through. But I really wonder what is going to be the turning point for the nation to make an all hands in, all out effort to eliminate poverty in our midst? Because we can do it. We can do it.
And if I could just
go ahead, Jake. Yep.
Add on, like the from my standpoint, it is, to say nothing of what it has done, what federal stimulus packages 1, 2, and 3, because it is worth noting, as Cedric suggested, that there are a lot of really good people that are really well intentioned in Washington, D.C. that are working on these packages. So there are good things happening. What the encouragement is from our vantage point is keep going. There is more to be done, and we're a long way from whatever enough looks like.
Cedric, a specific follow for you. Some have made note of the universal basic income concept and that there might be an opportunity here. Thoughts, feedback? Do you agree?
Well, I think that this is the opportunity for us to try to put in place or experiment in different municipalities like Mayor Tubbs has in Stockton, to experiment in different municipalities around how UBI would work in that particular locale. Again, I think we have to get over this thing about this hang up that we seem to gravitate toward as a nation around, if you are poor or if you're not working, then it's your fault and it's incumbent on you to pull yourself up by your own bootstraps, which is one of the ways that I think communities get blocked around even considering UBI, universal basic income, as a way to ensure that people aren't going to be resource strapped and aren't going to have the indignity of poverty then force them into making decisions that aren't great ones, that nobody should have to make. So I'm a fan of trying to test out the viability of UBI where applicable and where it isn't going to harm people in its application and administration. I have thought about, I'm also an artist, so I've thought about, what if there were this universal basic income, or there was some kind of minimal level of income? What would people be doing instead of the work that they're doing now in order to earn an income and live? How might we see our communities become more creative, more productive, more energetic? What change would we have in our communities if that were indeed the case? Now, I understand UBI isn't meant to take care of that altogether. It's meant to just sustain folks so that again, we don't have people who are completely resource strapped. But I'm all for trying to figure out how it could be applicable and work.
Thanks. You referenced artists, and we've thought a lot about how we can create community in the virtual space as a local news organization. And one of the things that we will begin to do starting this weekend is to host virtual concerts with local artists, and we'll do a GoFundMe for them and let the community hopefully come around and coalesce around those whom they would have otherwise seen out and about at gigs. And so fingers crossed. And there's a little plug, my first plug, please check us out on Saturday night. Artists, those who are self-employed, independent contractors, they're getting assistance right now in the form of a stimulus. For 8 weeks, there's an additional $600 on top of EDD or unemployment that each individual who is not employed may receive, and this is coming from the federal government. But I'm curious to know, so, we've also heard a lot of conversations about housekeepers, about workers who might not be eligible for benefits at this point in time. Thoughts or strategies on short-term support for housekeepers, plumbers, cosmetologists, barbers, folks who, again, may be working in a sort of an economy that is less measurable and therefore less reachable. How might we come to their support as we navigate through this period, this very tight period in time?
This is a spot where I think that the private sector has a real opportunity to lead, and certainly in a similar way, philanthropy and government can follow suit. But there's a broad set of businesses that will experience positive impacts amidst COVID. Take, for example, those who are suppliers of whether it be emergency technology or remote work technology. We're talking via Zoom. It's been a pretty good quarter for Zoom. And Bitwise is a company that can continue its growth on the enterprise software side amidst COVID. And where I say we can provide leadership is we're in shelter in place. Our janitorial staff might not be coming, or suppliers of office supplies, whether that's paper towels or paper or whatever it may be at home, if you have a housekeeper or you pay somebody who does your hair or whatever it may be. If you're still doing well in this moment, we need to be, and particularly if businesses are still doing well in this moment, we need to be paying folks at full freight. Don't want to do the takeout because you're concerned about the health risk that might be associated with that. Buy it anyway. You don't feel comfortable with the housekeeper coming into the house during shelter in place. Pay them anyway. Those are, and if you take that to all of the people that are growing and selling food, all of the people that are building and selling technology, all of the folks that their businesses are actually grown in an emergency, and all of us continue to pay people at full freight or even ahead, we would stem off a lot of the fallout that we're going to just pay for in a different way. If we don't choose to pay for it directly, we're going to pay for it when the government has to step in a second later than it wished it could have and charge a dollar more than we would have needed to if we paid in advance. So I think that the private sector, and particularly those of us that are in a position of privilege in this moment, have a real responsibility to lead right now.
You know, I also wonder how unions and trade associations are weighing in and making recommendations around how to sustain their members, how to sustain the folks that they are most focused on and concerned about as part of the labor force, because I feel like the best answers come from that set of workers themselves. And so with respect to housekeepers or plumbers, as you were naming the kinds of roles that people play and work hard at every day, I was thinking about the ways that they are self-organized and can provide answers about, well, this is what we need, because they know specifically about the kinds of work nuances and challenges that they face. So this is interesting because I haven't had an eye out for what unions are doing in response to COVID, but I think now I will go look.
And we have seen some response from unions and some response in healthcare and in grocery mostly. And I think there have been some responses. So for example, a number of grocery store groups have increased worker salaries, right, in response to, and there's a conversation about hazard pay and whether that should be a consideration. So certainly a conversation worth continuing. And Cedric, I appreciate your perspective, which is first and foremost, we need to hear from them and we need to know what they need, which is very important. So I want to make sure that we do one last round of introductions here for folks who may have joined partway through. I'm with Jake Soberal, who's the CEO and co-CEO and co-founder of Bitwise, and Cedric Brown with the Kapor Center. I'm Lauren Gustis. I'm the editor at the Sacramento Bee and the West Region editor for McClatchy. I want to leave people with one thing. So I've got one final question for you both. And I'm really looking for a practical recommendation. We're all here in our homes, hopefully healthy and with ample access to food and other necessities. And we're very fortunate to be in those positions if we are watching and we do find ourselves in those positions. And so for those of us who have an opportunity to do some good from here today, what is the one thing you might recommend that we do as we look to support recovery? How can we engage today in a way that will be meaningful and meaningful tomorrow and moving forward? So I'm looking for your thoughts on how in a very specific and practical capacity we can do good today that will be beneficial tomorrow and on down the road. I know I'm asking the policy guy to dig way down, but tell me, what can we do? How can we help?
Well, I'm going to use this opportunity to think of today as meaning in the next several months, to look at the challenges that we have faced as a nation. I'm going to make this a domestic places in a domestic context. Look at the challenges that we have faced as a nation, that you have faced in your own community, immediate community, and think about what is about to happen in November. How are those challenges going to inform what you do in November at the ballot box, up and down the ticket? How is the identification of these challenges and the things that you feel need to happen going to inform how you vote and do vote? That's what I want to leave people with, in addition to do something. If you can find a philanthropic effort to participate in by going to your local community foundation website and seeing different volunteer at distance opportunities or ways to contribute to COVID response funds, do it, do something, and vote.
I certainly would echo all of that. My perspective, I'll try and maybe focus more in a local sense. Sitting here in Fresno, I think you shared at the top, Lauren, that we headed into this where some large percentage of Americans didn't have $400 to deal with an emergency. That means, I think, reciprocally, that if you have several times more than that to deal with this emergency, now is the time to spend that money. You're in a position of privilege, and waiting is so. As you think about, Stu, about what would be the perfect place to give, the nonprofit that you love is laying off employees and not providing services. The restaurant that your favorite restaurant to eat at is shutting down and closing its doors and unlikely to come back. The folks who support your lifestyle, whether that is your plumber or your mechanic or whomever else, is slipping into abject poverty for which there is no safety net. We're hearing about the long delays in getting the stimulus check at an individual level. We're hearing about all sorts of other challenges. So if you've got that, we have on our team, so Bitwise doesn't employ anybody who makes less than $20 an hour. That is the minimum amount of money that you can make at Bitwise, no matter what your role is. And we employ a lot of people who make several orders of magnitude bigger than that. So as we message out to a team, we're talking to a broad spectrum of earners. And so it doesn't matter if your ability to give is $5, $10, $10,000, whatever it is, and if that looks like giving or spending, we need to pour out our cup and our dollars right now. And it doesn't have to be the perfect gift or spend. It just has to get out the door, because if this is the moment, if we begin to clam up in the interest of self-preservation, we will ultimately be working to our own self-destruction. Because we'll see economies and communities around us begin to fail in a way that ultimately will undermine our starting selfish goal. So spend money if you have it, I think is and that's as a business and as an individual.
That was great. Both of you, thank you so much. I just want to reiterate, if you are looking for support, be it retraining, new employment opportunities, health and food support at this point in time, go to onwardca.org. It is the repository for resources across the state. And the two gentlemen on this call have helped bring it to you. We're grateful for your time this afternoon, for your stewardship here in California. And we will wrap now 1 minute before 1, so you can get back to your very busy days. And again, wrap with gratitude. Thank you so much. And thanks to everyone who watched today. You can find this video on replay on YouTube and on Facebook at any of the Bees or the Merced Sun-Star or San Luis Obispo Tribune's websites. Thanks everyone, and have a great afternoon.
Thank you, Lauren. Thank you, Jake.
Thank you, guys.